I grew up on the countryside, right next to a national park frequently visited by nature lovers and bird enthusiasts. It was a kind of park where you're not really allowed to bike or ride horses, only walk or run, but the 10-year-old me felt like it was a stupid rule, so I did so anyway. The trail was perfect for it. I knew fully well that I wasn't supposed to do that, and was called a couple of times, but nothing come of it other than a half-hearted, "Don't do it again." And I did. Always, of course. That's until one day, something frightening happened to make all of that stop. My family were horse breeders. I would often take one of the horses out for a ride. Now on this day, it was very early in the morning. It was the first day of summer holiday. It was beautiful out, misty and foggy, yet sky that promised a sunny day. Since it was so early, like before 6 o'clock, I knew there wouldn't be anybody on the trail to see me, so I let the horse set off free, on full speed along the trail. I only slowed down on parts of the trail that got steep and it wasn't as safe for the horse, and there was a river on the other side. I was worried because I knew that if I went close to the edge there was no coming back from it. Even that young, I still had some risk assessment. Suddenly the horse come to a halt and refused to take another step. Now I've grown up with horses and I know that usually indicates that there's something you have to investigate. Is there something with the hoofs? Did she spot something? The hoofs were fine. The horse still didn't move an inch. That's when I saw it. Somebody set up a trap. A thin metal wire across the trail, at perfect neck height for an adult. I stopped and looked around but didn't see anyone. The wire was well attached to 2 trees and it was impossible for me to remove. So I led the horse around it, and to do that I had to walk up a bit into the wooden area on the side of the trail. That's when I heard somebody singing. There's a song called Hey Tum Jabula, and it was that melody, but the lyrics were different and muffled, in a weird sniggery voice. Today I only remember parts of it, but translated it would have been something like, "Hey all you runners, come here passing, let the life of blood pour out." I, as silently as I could and with my heart in my throat, backed away. I got up on the horse and hurried back the way I come from as fast as I could. I knew that I had to tell somebody about it, but at the same time wanted to avoid admitting riding a horse in the forbidden forests and trails, so now I had a problem. I then remembered the stories about a madman that lived in a shed in the woods, a shed that was once a cottage for the local hunter. I rode home like a madman. When I got home, I told my older brother what happened and he went back there with me. We found the wire trap. After even more searching, we found a spear-like pole in the ground, right over the spot where you'd land if you came running and jumped over or fallen on the trail. That's when we called the police. They searched the area and similar traps were found, but no sign of the old man. The following summer though, there was big news about the spear-like poles being found right under the water surface, directly under the little tower that you're supposed to dive from at the lake. There was also black garbage bags cleverly disguised so if a car went into them, then the car would have to go off the road and straight into the water.
When I was in middle school, our school bus would always drop us off at the bottom of a hill. My sister and I would walk about 4 or 5 blocks to our house with a few neighbourhood friends. It would take about 20 minutes give or take, but on most days I was always with someone. One day it was incredibly foggy, like you couldn't even see past a row of houses. I was dropped off at my usual spot, this time alone. My sister was at an after school program and the other kids seemed to have been at theirs as well. It didn't matter to me though, since I just had a short walk. As I began walking up the hill, I heard the faint sound of an engine growing closer behind me. Suddenly the accelerator stopped, so I turned around. This was your stereotypical kidnapping van you see on TV, tinted windows in the front and none at the back. It seemed odd to me, but I kept walking my usual route. The van accelerated slowly, then stopped. I turned around to see that it would stay a good few meters closely to me. I repeated my walk a few times, only to notice that whoever was in the van was following me. My body broke out in a cold sweat. I had 3 more blocks to go, and it seemed as if this van was going wherever I was. I remembered stranger danger in grade school and turned the corner of the block by me. Once I heard the van accelerate again, I went into a sprint and hid behind one of the houses nearby. I heard the van stop, but the engine kept running. After waiting a while, I could still hear it, waiting patiently. Terrified of being seen, I went through people's backyards until I reached my house. I still remember that moment today, and every so often it gives me chills thinking of what could have happened if I waited any longer. I felt like I was being examined and stalked, this person waiting to run out and grab me. Thankfully, I never saw that white van again, but I feel like I should have said something about it.
When I went home for 3 weeks about a month and a half ago, my dad decided that we should do a bit of night fishing. I'm not a huge fan of night fishing, any fishing of that sort, or my dad for that matter. Our personalities are way too similar. If you leave us together for more than an hour, there may be blood left over by the time that he and I are done, playing several dozens of rounds of fisticuffs between the stubborn arguing and shouting. Anyway, my dad decided to take me up this river by a new house that they'd just finished building. My mum and brother stayed behind as we traipsed through the dark woods. Now my family lives in Oregon, and the river was about half a mile in from my family's property, over massive fallen trees and stumps that I easily slipped on. Not knowing where they lay, my dad merely scoffed at me and reminded me that city living makes you soft. I argued back to him that I didn't know the area, and he knew it better than I did. It just spiraled downhill from there. Arguing broke out between us, making the peaceful night loud and chaotic. We didn't stop arguing the entire way down the river. My father started going on about my quote less than Christian lifestyle when I criticised his manner of parenting my 20-year-old autistic brother. When we got to the river, we finally settled into an awkward tense silence and got our gear out. I knew that the fight was far from over, so I just sat down on a fallen stump and shivered my arse off. I had lived in warm climate for over a year, and honestly, coming out here was probably him punishing me for leaving the Pacific Northwest. We actually refused to talk to one another as our lights danced across the water, when suddenly my dad stood up. His light landed on the other side of the river. There, on the bank, stood a man looking right at us. He wore a bright orange t-shirt and a pair of scraggly jeans, but for the most part, he just looked average. The problem was, he had this massive machete hanging from his belt. My dad snapped to me to stop hacking all of our stuff up, so I followed his command. My dad then started shouting at the man across the river. The conversation was mostly lost to the roar of the white cracked river, but I can make out that they're very agitated, and the other guys making hand gestures at my dad every time that I dared to peek. Their voices grew, and my fear grew with it. My father was never one to carry personal protection. The thing was, we didn't know what else that guy had on him, outside of just that machete. Yeah, we did have that river between us, but it was shallow and had plenty of places to cross, even if it was snow runoff. I had no doubt in my mind that this guy could literally be behind us in minutes. My dad suddenly said to me, "Drop the gear and let's go." I looked up one last time to see the man started walking into the water, his hand flitting against his weapon. My dad put a firm hand on my shoulder and led me back into the woods towards our house. My dad's really into long distance running and marathons. I think that if I wasn't so terrified, I probably wouldn't have been able to keep up. I couldn't hear if this man was coming after us because my heart was beating so loud in my ears, but I followed my dad so closely I almost ran into him multiple times. Finally, we found our road and made a break for my parents' house. As soon as we were through the front door, my dad had the doors locked and kept a vigilant watch out, making sure no crazy man with a machete come up to our house. After what felt like hours, we finally decided that there was no guy wearing orange that was coming from the woods towards us. We then sat down to tell our mum what happened. We avoided the part where we had been arguing and told her everything else. We went to bed without apologising, and I honestly felt horrid. The next day we alerted the police, and my dad and I went out there with the only gun that he owned. We found that our campsite had been destroyed. All of our equipment was ruined. We never saw or heard of the guy again.
Being from a third world country, you see a lot of shit happening all over the world. You never think it's going to happen to you. After all, you're careful, you know better, you mind your own business, and everything is going to be 5 by 5. My mum is one of the strongest women I know. She's one of 15 siblings, which I think toughened her up and made her a woman of strong morals and a no-nonsense attitude. She is one of the oldest of her siblings, so she has that nurturing mama bear thing down. She'll take crap from no one, and when confronted with fight or flight, she'll fight every single time. Like the one time my mum was picking up my sisters from kindergarten, and some arsehole tried to snatch her purse. She took notice of him walking towards her with no good intentions, and she told my sisters to hold on to her skirt, and when the man made his move, she pressed her thumbs up against the man's eyes and scratched him wherever she could reach him. She's gotten mellower now, in her later life, but for me, she is still the epitome of love and strength. This is a story of how I almost lost my mum to road rage. I was 10, it was a Sunday, and I had gone to the swimming pool with my friends. My dad was supposed to pick me up at around 5 PM. By 7 PM I was fuming, angry, and decided to walk back to my house. It's probably a 20-minute walk. I got home and was mad, and my sisters were scolding me because it was dark and it was dangerous for a 10-year-old to be walking home on his own, and that dad had gone to pick me up like 5 minutes ago. I didn't care, I was pissed off, and I just walked into my parents' room to give my mum a piece of my mind because I couldn't tell dad off, and I found her sobbing and in distress. I was asking her what was going on. She was angry at my dad and she didn't want to talk to him again. My anger faded and my curiosity strikes instead. Turns out at around 4:30 PM, when my dad was going to pick me up, he was coming back from his farm and some dude cut him off, and my dad, who unfortunately had some road rage, honked his horn, pulled down the window on my mum's side and yelled at him. The dude in the other car lowered his window, pulled a gun out and started shooting at my dad's car. My dad hit the brakes and let the other car pull further away. They stopped and got out the car to catch their breath, and that's when my mum saw a hole in the space between the passenger front door and the passenger back door. A bullet nearly missed my mum's head and she was hysterical. They got home and my mum broke down and my dad had to calm her down, thus he was pretty late for picking me up. It's probably not as scary as some of the other stuff people post here, but the thought that I may have lost my mum at the age of 10 scared me shitless. It's been 20 years since that day, and sometimes it randomly pops into my head, and I have to talk myself off the ledge when I wonder, what if?
This happened about 10 years ago, when I was 17. It was a Friday night and a friend was driving me home from a party. Neither of us had anything to drink, something I should clarify early. We turned into my street at about 11 PM. The street is dead end and in a very bushy area with minimal lighting. It's quite pretty during the day, but unsettling at night. And topping off the creepy factor was a swing that hung from a large tree in front of a house at the top of the street as you turn in. It had been there for longer than I was born, and it was quite rickety. It still functioned though. Having said that, I don't have any concrete memories of it being used in the last 5 or even 10 years. I'd always joked about how creepy this swing was to people when they went past it, but this time, it was even creepier because when we drove past it, there was a little girl sitting on it. She looked upset and had her head down, slowly swinging but not letting her feet off the ground. She slowly looked up as we drove past and kind of just glared at us. She looked like she was no older than 8. As unusual as it was not safe for her to be out this late. My friend and I both assumed she had a fight with her parents and was sulking or something, and ultimately, we just really didn't care enough or think it was important at the time. My friend kept on driving for another 15 seconds till we reached my house, halfway down the street, about 250 meters away from the swing. We stopped outside my driveway, facing the top of the street as often happened, and we just ended up sitting in the car chatting about school, girls, and sometimes super deep and meaningful stuff, at least for that age. About 10 minutes into our conversation, we noticed some movement at the top of the street as the girl got off the swing and walked onto the middle of the road. She turned and started slowly walking towards us. As I'd mentioned, it was really dark outside and there was only about 3 street lamps between us and her. This meant that for several seconds while she walked towards us, we couldn't see her and she would emerge far closer than she had been seen before stepping into the darkness. I drew attention to it and joked about how scary it was. My friend laughed along. Now at this time, The Ring had only come out a couple of years prior, and the fact that she was pale and dressed in a white dressing gown just concreted that it was really a terrifying situation. As she emerged into the light of the second closest lamp, about 100 meters away, the tone completely changed. We were both still laughing somewhat, but it was definitely more out of nerves, and we were whispering, "Oh God, oh Christ," as she started getting closer. It was far less funny because somehow this little girl wasn't a girl. It was clear she was an adult woman, probably in her late 60s. It was unmistakably the same person that we'd seen getting off the swings, but it was like she had aged 50 years as she walked down the street towards us. She was clearly looking in our direction but squinting because of the car's headlights. Now this woman was probably about 20 meters away and I could see her a lot more clearly in the car's headlights. She looked slightly haggard and the outside of her eyes were reddish as if she had been crying or hadn't slept for a few days. As she drew closer with each meter, I couldn't stop thinking that 100% was the same little girl 20 minutes ago. What the hell? I didn't verbalize any of these thoughts at the time, but it was clear we were both getting scared. When she was about 5 meters away, my friend turned off the engine, auto-locked the doors and turned off the headlights. We slouched into our seats as a woman slowly came to our direction. She then walked right past the car, mumbling to herself. After about 5 seconds, we sat up again, laughing at the situation and now confident it was just creepy and not dangerous. My friend commented that she was drunk, which I accepted. We continued talking for a few more minutes, but it was clear that we were so unsettled by this that we didn't really want to be there. I didn't look back to see where the woman was, but I knew it was a dead-end street and there was nowhere for the woman to have gone. Now I knew for a fact that she didn't live any of the houses that way, but I hoped that maybe she was just visiting or something. By this stage, my friend and I had shifted in our seats and we're now facing each other. Then suddenly, just like a jump scare in a horror film, I saw the woman quickly emerge from behind my friend's head and stare right at him through the driver's side window. She then cocked her head like she was possessed or something, almost like she was curious at my reaction, and leaned forward till her nose was touching the glass. I couldn't believe what was happening. I shouted out shit, jumping up and shaking the car. My friend's eyes and mouth were wide open as he slowly turned around, but by then, she stumbled about a meter away from us and we could no longer see her. She was so disturbing to look at. We both sat there in silence wondering where the hell she had gone. We were really confused at this point. After a couple of seconds she appeared again, stumbled off until eventually she was in the gap between us and the first and second street light. Even after waiting about 5 minutes, we never saw her emerge again. We called it a night, me bolting from my friend's car to my house and him speeding off with his doors locked. Since then, I have told very few people about this experience, and I still have no idea what happened to this day. I can't even bring myself to look at that swing anymore. God knows what happened. I don't want to know.
Here's a creepy incident that I endured some years ago. I'm a 41-year-old male, but the following events happened to me in 1999 when I was 24 years old. It's important to mention that I had an average build and was never a tough guy. I was working the graveyard shift at a motel in Oregon. My job title was night auditor, as I was expected to compare the daily revenue with the figures in the computer. Occasionally someone would check in or out, but on the most part I saw hardly a soul on my shift. My only other duty was to walk around the property every couple of hours to make sure there was nothing unusual going on. Checking the darkened property at night was always a bit creepy. The motel had a lot of rooms, and the large parking lot offered a great many hiding spots for anyone who might be lurking. In my first few months, I had to chase the occasional bum off the property or out of the lobby, but my typical night was extremely uneventful. Nonetheless, I was nervous about being antagonised by violence-prone weirdos, so I bought a big can of pepper spray and a mag light. One night, at 3 AM, I stepped outside to check the property. It was midwinter and very cold, so I wore my coat. On the opposite side of the parking lot, a large man in a green t-shirt and jeans was marching purposefully towards one of the buildings. I thought it was odd that he'd be outside in just a t-shirt, since it was so cold that my face was stinging. He marched to a motel room door and tried to open it, finding it locked. I watched him intently. He marched to the next door and tried to open it, then the next one. Excuse me," I said somewhat loudly. The man stopped, facing away from me, his hand still gripping a door handle. I walked toward him, gripping my maglite and pepper spray tightly. It was obvious to me that this guy was up to no good. "May I help you, sir?" I added. The guy turned around and faced me. He was nearly 6.5 feet tall, looked muscular beneath a thick layer of body fat, had big, curly dark hair with a thick handlebar moustache, and worst of all, was covered with blood. It was all over his face, and the entire front of his shirt. Even his jeans were wet with blood, all around the waist, groin and hips, and his pant legs were streaked with blood right down to the cuffs. Worse yet, he looked at me with a crazed expression. His eyes widened with irrational rage, and his teeth clenched and fully exposed. He looked like a 40-ish escaped con auditioning for the role of Carrie. The sight of this gore-soaked freak made me forget to breathe. He walked toward me with quick, long strides that prompted me to click my maglite on and shine it at him. The light reflected brightly off his face, informing me that blood on it was fresh. He was undaunted by the flashlight and maintained his course. "Sir," I said, "are you a guest at the motel?" He continued toward me. The closer he came, the clearer I could hear his manic breathing, which contained a growl with each exhalation. I felt it was obvious that he was going to attack. "I have pepper spray, and I'm ready to use it," I said. His growling became more vocal, and he seemed to hasten his step. At this point, he was about 20 feet away from me. A quick side note about the pepper spray. I bought that particular can because the label claimed it would fire a stream accurately up to 15 feet. The blood-covered man raised his gnarled, bloody hands towards me as though he intended to claw my face apart. I pressed the button on my pepper spray can, aiming high so as to hit his face. The stream was powerful, and even had a bit of recoil that kicked my hand back. The beam from my maglite was also aimed at his face, so I could see the stream of liquid blast him directly in the eyes. It was so forceful that much of the blood on his face was instantly washed away. His eyes and mouth snapped shut a moment before he stopped and did a clumsy half pirouette away from me. I stopped spraying at him. He emitted a long, loud shriek of rage-laden anguish and raised his hands to his face. "I'm going to call the police," I said. I announced that, in case he intended to resume his approach once his pain had subsided. "Don't think this is over," he growled. He turned and faced me with one eye partially open and a large glob of mucus hanging from his nostrils. "You are a dead man," he hissed. He faced the exit of the parking lot and staggered toward it. I rushed into the lobby, locked the big glass doors and called 911. They told me they'd send officers to make a report. The cops arrived minutes later and took my statement. They were particularly interested in when I told them he was covered in blood. They said they might be in touch later on if someone turned up injured or worse. Thankfully, I never heard from them. I don't know if the blood on the whack job was the result of an injury he'd sustained, or if he'd hurt somebody, and I couldn't say if he was legitimately insane or just out of his mind on hard drugs. All I know is that he was too out of sorts to wash or even wipe the blood from his face, so I shudder to imagine what he would have done if an occupied room had been accessible to him, or if he'd managed to get his big, bloody hands on me.
I never even met him. I didn't know his name or his face. I was blissfully unaware of his very existence. I will never know why or when it started, and for that, I guess I'm glad. I moved into my very small apartment in February last year. My landlord, Olivia, was a sweet older woman who would cook food and sometimes bring me some. She was really great to me. Even when I told her my problem, I'm antisocial, but she didn't mind renting to a reclusive young girl who reminded her of her granddaughter. Every few weeks, she would knock on my door, then leave, letting me know that she was leaving something for me. I loved that. Not even my family could cook so well. The next morning, I'd wash and leave her empty containers outside my door, but by an hour or so, she would take them back again. The other neighbours that I had seemed to be fine. I worked from home, and I never visited them. Where I did work from home, any time I was forced to go out, I rushed out and into my apartment and avoiding an uncomfortable situation. I loved living alone. It was everything I hoped for. I could just breathe. By April though, I started to notice that things were not right. They were moving or plain disappearing. I'm convinced it was just my anxiety caused by new medication and the move. Another side effect was it would make me drowsy. Since I hated seeing the doctor, I just dealt with it. I took naps during the day now and eventually stopped caring. That's until one incident that doubled my paranoia. Olivia brought me some sort of Greek tossed salad and dressing for lunch one day, and I really enjoyed it with my Netflix. I fell asleep and woke up in the middle of Portalania, and woke up at the usual 5 PM. Now, what was not usual was my bedding on the opposite side of me. It was disturbed. I only sleep on the right side, always. The other strange thing is that the other side of the bed was warm. I thought maybe I rolled over to it. I just thought it was odd but dismissed it. I got up and searched my apartment, gripping my phone with 911 typed in. Nothing else throughout my entire apartment was disturbed though, and everything was pretty much where it should have been, except for the odd shoe or whatnot. I thought about telling somebody though, my parents, maybe Olivia, but it's not like life or death really, so I'm not going to reach out to anyone. I wasn't scared, I was nervous, maybe a little stubborn, but I stayed. I'm not letting some stupid anxiety ruin my lovely lonely world. May came and it was getting worse. My panties, toothbrush, hell, even my food was being misplaced. Every time I woke up there was this strange odour in the air. I finally realised that this won't go away by ignoring it. I called my mum and begged her to come and stay a couple of days. When I got home I told them everything, saying it just to solidify what had happened. That weekend, my dad went to my apartment and what he found was truly horrific. Written back on the walls were, "Come back, baby, please." He ran out of the apartment and called the police. There was no one living in my apartment, but someone definitely had access besides me. The investigation revealed a man. He was the son of my landlord and was in a projected relationship with me. They showed me his confession tape. He admitted coming into my apartment every night and every day with his mother's extra key. He claimed that we were in love and he had my permission. He actually drugged his mother's food that she left out for me, and that was what made me feel really drowsy and I could fall asleep. He would then come in, watch me sleep, touch my hair, kiss my shoulder. The leftovers I had in the fridge were tested and confirmed. I was absolutely horrified and disgusted. There was a man that I never knew existed collecting my drain hair, clothes, trash, and practically lived in my apartment for 4 months.
For a little background, I'm a 27-year-old female and I recently just moved into a nice apartment in a safe neighbourhood with my 2 dogs, Charles and Wigwam. Charles is a Corgi German Shepherd mix and is the most loving but overly obnoxious dog, while Wigwam is a Lhasa Apso who is quiet, sweet, and most definitely scared shitless of his own shadow. I've only been in my new place for about a month, and after this experience, I highly doubt I'm going to make it here for the duration of my year-long lease. The way these apartments are set up is that each floor has its own set of doors that lead to 4 apartments and a fire escape door that only opens from the inside. I'm on the back side of the building, which places my patio about 10ish feet from the fire escape stairs. I take my dogs out 3 times a day, and every time I leave my apartment, I put the bar lock on my patio door and lock my front door without fail. About a week ago, we had a snowstorm, and I had cracked my patio door because, well, I love cold weather, and I'm an adult, and if I want to watch the snowfall, then I can do as I please. It was around 11 PM, and I decided that since it was getting late, I should take the dogs out for the night, and since they both hate snow, this would be a quick trip. I go to lock the patio door and decide against it, because I'm on the freaking 5th floor and I'm only going to be outside for a few minutes. I get the dogs ready, grab my keys, and lock my door as I leave the apartment. I get down to the designated pet area with my beloved snow-hating dogs and let them do their thing, and then back to the apartment we go, and we get back in safely, or so I thought. This is where I thought I was losing my mind, but in actuality, shit was about to get real. As soon as we walked into the apartment, my dogs run over to the patio door, and I notice that the door is shut and the bar is locked. I go into the kitchen to get dog treats, and both dogs start going batshit crazy and growling at a large cedar chest in my living room, and as I'm walking to see what all the commotion is about, I see a pair of eyes creeping from under the chest lid. I stood there for about 5 seconds before I realised what I was seeing and calmly walked backwards to my front door, opened it and told my dogs, "Let's go outside," and they ran out without leashes, and I immediately get them and myself in my car, lock the doors and call the police. The police show up in less than 5 minutes and they go up to my apartment. After about 20 minutes, 2 officers are dragging a 40-ish year old guy out of my building in cuffs, and the plot thickens. This dude had been watching me since I moved in, and had been staking out my place, waiting for an opportunity to get inside, because he knew I lived alone. If that's not creepy enough already, he had a fanny pack, since it's still 1990, and he had a pocket knife, needles, ketamine, and a picture of me from the day I moved in. His plan was to sneak in through my patio door, wait for me to fall asleep, and then do God knows what. Needless to say, I didn't sleep for days because I thought he would come back. Luckily, the bastard is still in jail, but I'll never forget those eyes.
This takes place 4 years ago in Kansas City, Missouri. I'm originally from California, so trading up city life for a less urban life was very challenging for me. Making friends was hard, but I made the move with my dad, who lived in an apartment complex with a roommate. My dad was a trucker, so he was gone for weeks at a time. While I was left alone, I would come home to a foreign place that I slowly become accommodated to. My roommate was gone for most of the time because he had a girlfriend, and he would leave me with his dog, so I never really was truly alone. I had an old lady for a neighbour that would come up and check up on me too. That's how people were in that area, and I found it kind of nice how people knew their neighbours. I got to know everybody in the building's name after about 6 months of living there, except for one. There was a man who lived there who was in his mid-50s. He lived directly below my apartment. He looked, for lack of a better term, like a creep. He was balding except for on one side of his head. His hair was scraggly too. He was tall and kind of skinny. He had outdated 90s glasses that you'd see on America's Most Wanted and a thick moustache. He was the only person in the building who wasn't friendly, or at least didn't make the effort to say hello or to introduce himself. He also happened to be the maintenance guy for all 5 buildings. I didn't think much of it at first. I honestly don't care if you're not overly friendly to me. I enjoy having my own space, and sometimes being too friendly is suspicious. That's just a personal problem, but I'm explaining why it didn't send up red flags at first. One day when I was pulling out of the driveway to go to work in the morning, I noticed across the large lawn that led to the door to our buildings, the maintenance guy was standing in the centre, staring directly at me. Stare I think is the wrong word. It was much more of a glare. At first I was confused, thinking perhaps he was looking at someone or something behind me. I was the only one there. Although a bit creeped out, I shrugged it off and continued with my day, forgetting all about it. The next day I was over at my neighbour's Claire's apartments, the old lady. She actually happened to bring up the maintenance issue that she had, but she mentioned that she would never ask the maintenance man for anything, and neither should I. I tried to ask her more about what she meant by that, but she ended up being very broad and just something along the lines of, yeah, he's just a creep. Fast forward to the first incident. It was around 2 AM and I was still awake, but only barely, sitting on the couch watching Parks and Rec alone in the apartment. I was starting to drift off into a deep sleep when I heard a soft noise on the front door. Thankfully the show was very low, because I normally don't pick up on noise most of the time. I turned off my TV and started listening. Next to the living room, on the right side of the patio area and on the left side of the kitchen and front door, the light from the moon and outside lamps were flooding through the patio glass door, so I could see the doorknob moving backwards and forwards. There was somebody trying to open it, but they were using a key. In an instant, the door flung open and I was on my feet. With nowhere to hide at this point, I stood my ground and saw the silhouette step into the kitchen. It was a maintenance guy. My stomach dropped and he stopped in his tracks when he spotted me, looking at me as if he was expecting me to be not awake. I noticed he had a large coat on, even though it wasn't winter or even cold that night. Now I should mention that I only noticed this because of the fact that it looked so bulky. It was like he was actually carrying stuff inside it, but I just couldn't see. "What the hell are you doing?" I managed to whisper out to him. I was shaking and my knees started to feel like they were going to give way. I am a 22-year-old woman, or I was at the time, standing a whopping 5'4" with no way to defend myself. Literally, all I could do is stand there. He looked shocked, which made me feel like I gained a little power from the situation. He replied angrily and confused, "Your toilet's making a really loud sound, I can hear it from my bedroom." Now I was angry and terrified and only reacted with anger when I saw him scrambling for more excuses. "So you just let yourself into my apartment at 2 in the morning. I'm reporting this to management first thing in the morning." He then stepped in closer. I backed up a few steps but still stood my ground, quickly turning the light on. "The toilet is rumbling. I need to check it now." Now I was trembling so hard that I could barely stand. I had adrenaline and anger and fear, and this was just trembling throughout my entire body. I just said, "Get the hell out." He started to take the liberty and looked around the kitchen where I was standing. My head immediately thought, crap, what if he goes for a knife? And that's when he said it. "I can come whenever I want." You know that? This sentence makes me shiver to this day. I really didn't know what to do. and felt the power over the situation quickly dwindling down to a bad feeling. If you get the hell out of my apartment right now, if you don't, I'm gonna start screaming as loud as I can. My voice was cracking and shaky, which made my heart actually drop into my stomach to hear my fear. I immediately felt like I was going to be sick when he took yet another step towards me. "Check the lease, I can come in whenever I want." "I'll see you later." He winked at me, creating a wave of nauseous feelings and feeling like I was going to faint. He turned around and walked out, closing the door right behind him, even going as far as to lock it from the outside with his extra key. The next day I was contacted by management as soon as their office opened. I could tell the conversation wasn't going anywhere when the manager sounded irritated right off the bat. When I told her that it was about the maintenance guy that entered my apartment illegally, she cut me off and told me that they do not allow any illegal activity and to take what I was saying very seriously. I thought, yes, I've got him, until the manager said, "You can't just throw around accusations with no proof. This man has dedicated over 20 years to working for this company and we do not plan on getting rid of him anytime soon. Perhaps if you'd read over the lease like you should have, then you would have seen the clause that says that the maintenance worker has keys and priority. And if the maintenance guy has an issue, they can enter you anytime, any day." This floored me. It couldn't possibly be legal. Of course I'm from California, of course I didn't read the lease. Now, when I moved there, my dad was already living in the apartment and I had nowhere else to go. This meant that I would have had to sign the lease no matter what. Fast forward again, a few days go by and I don't see Mr. Maintenance Freak until I do. This time I'm putting in after a long 10-hour shift at work. I've forgotten about this scary incident, but I had to put it in the back of my mind for the time being to concentrate on other stuff, although I lost sleep over it. I parked my car facing the large lawn area again and started to use my phone for a bit. I'm peering down at my phone and glance up for a second and I see him. He's standing across the lawn staring angrily at me, furious. Quickly I went back down to my phone and pretended I didn't see him. Getting that shaking feeling again. As a paranoid person, I put the key in the ignition just in case and pretended to scroll through my phone. I locked my door. I glared up again and this time he's stalking towards me. I now quickly look in my rearview mirror, hoping to see somebody else that he may be angrily going towards. Of course there's no one. It's dark now, but when he gets about 10 or 15 feet away from the front of my car, I can hear him shouting something. But I can't make out what he's saying. Now I put my phone down and watching him come right at me until he reaches my window and starts banging on it with all of his might. He slams his body into the door. He's also fidgeting angrily with the handle and trying to get the door open. My car doesn't have automatic locks, so I'm praying that all my doors are locked at this point. My hands are shaking so bad that I can't even start the car at first. When I finally do, I realise what he's saying. It was a repetitive cycle with the following: "I'm gonna get you, idiot. I told you I'd come whenever I want. You wanna take me on? I'll kill you." I peeled out of there so fast, not even knowing where to go. I drove to the next county over, found a motel and stayed the night there. The next day I took off work and went straight to the management's office. I told them exactly what happened and no matter what I said, they didn't believe me. The maintenance guy was apparently God's gift to mankind or something. He was a service to the world and they couldn't believe how great his 20 years of service was. And how could he possibly be threatening somebody's life? Long story short, I lost it. I called him a psychopath and ended up getting evicted. I reported all of this to the police, but between lack of evidence and his perfect shining record for his employers that seemed to love him so much, the police said there was nothing they could do. My dad and I ended up finding a nice new home about 10 minutes away from the place. I ended up inviting Claire, my older neighbour, to a new house a few months later. She told me that there was a single woman in the apartment before the roommate and my dad had moved in there, then also left in a hurry after something happened with the maintenance man taking photos of her walking to and from her car. When she confronted him, he said, "I can go wherever I want at any time."
I am a 22-year-old female, and at the time of this incident, I was about 16 or 17 years old. Because of what happened, I now never walk anywhere by myself after dark. I had decided to sneak out to meet up with a friend, but neither of us had a car, so we were walking to meet up halfway between our houses. We ended up meeting at around midnight, and the walk there went fine, no issues. We hung out for a while and ended up losing track of time. It was now about 3 AM. I had to get home before my parents woke up for work, or risk getting caught. We said our goodbyes and I started on my long walk home. Since it was 3 in the morning, it was basically a ghost town, not a person in sight. I hadn't even seen a single car drive past, so I figured it would be a nice walk home. I was wrong. About 10 minutes into my walk, I hear a car coming up behind me. Nothing alarming about that. As the car passed me, they slammed on their brakes, then cut off all their lights. Immediate red flag. I saw the car turn around the next street ahead, and I knew I would have to pass them to get home. Instead, I ran into a nearby parking lot and hid in the bushes, and pulled out my phone to call my sister, to at the very least let someone know where I was and what was happening, and call 911 if needed. I unlocked my phone, and of course 1%. Then my phone died. As soon as this happened, I started to panic. I waited there for what seemed like forever, and decided to start towards home again. I started walking again, and past the street they turned on, and didn't see any cars. I started to relax until I walked a bit further, and saw the very same car parked in the Burger King parking lot. As they saw me, they started to back out of the parking lot and heading towards me. I bolted across to the other side of the street. Instead of staying on the same road, I ducked into the neighbourhood that would let me go back on the main road, but closer to my house. I got back to the main road and thought I was in the clear, but then, sure enough, the creep was driving towards me, and as soon as he passed me, he made a mad U-turn, so that way he can follow me again, driving slow enough to be directly behind me. Luckily there was another car coming up behind him, so he was forced to speed up. I saw him up ahead going to turn around again. I got this opportunity to lay down in the grass between someone's fence and the sidewalk just out of sight, so any passing cars couldn't see me. After he passed again, I got up and started sprinting towards a neighbourhood that would lead out to another main road that my house is off of. I made it to the main road and was so close to my house, but again I see this car. He passed me and started turning around. I ran across the street and through this field, hopped over my neighbour's fence and cut across my court and ran inside. I had never been so happy to be home. This guy followed me for my entire walk home, and I'm not sure what would have happened if I had just kept walking and ignored all the warning signs, but I know his intentions weren't good. It was by far the scariest thing that's ever happened to me.